Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Article 3 of Question 28 of the first part of the second part of the Summa Theologiae, Thomas Aquinas is going to look at another effect that love has for us human beings, perhaps for other things as well, and it has to do with this term ecstasy, which is literally just a cognate of ecstasis, which is a Latin term, which is coming right from Greek as well. So it's an idea that's been around for a long time, and it means to be set outside of yourself in some way. We typically associate it, especially when we're thinking about love, with the ecstasy that's involved in romantic love, and, being totally outside of yourself, forgetting yourself. But there's other senses of this term. So he begins by considering some arguments against love producing ecstasy as an effect. And the first one, he says, ecstasy isn't an effect of love. Why? Because ecstasy implies the loss of reason, rationality, right? But love doesn't always do that. Lovers are sometimes masters of themselves, so love doesn't actually cause ecstasy. And you could actually say at this point, well, that's not a very good argument. It really depends on what the claim is taken to be. Are we saying that every instance of love always produces ecstasy, or are we saying that some love produces ecstasy in certain cases? If the latter is the case, then not a very good argument. The second one is a quite interesting one. We often think of the lover as going outside of themselves to the beloved, and indeed Thomas has talked about this in similar terms in earlier articles. And he says, the lover desires the beloved to be united to them, but they draw the beloved to themselves rather than betaking themselves to the beloved, so they don't really go outside of themselves. They want to bring the beloved close in so they can enjoy them and be involved with them. The third, love unites the beloved to the lover. So if the lover goes out from himself to betake himself into the beloved, then what that means is that the lover loves the beloved more than himself. And now notice, which is evidently false. Now, why is that an assumption there? Don't we sometimes talk about loving somebody more than you love yourself? So, there's a problem with that argument. But if it was correct in these premises, then ecstasy would not be a result of love. Now, usually the on the contrary, we don't have to worry too much about it. In this case, I think it's well worth looking at. So he's referring to Pseudo-Dionysius and the commentary on the divine names. He says that Dionysius says the divine love produces ecstasy, and God suffered ecstasy through love. Okay, that is definitely a view that Dionysius has, and Thomas is willing to go along with that. So, according to the same author, every love is a participated likeness of the divine love, and the divine love involves ecstasy. So every human love, because it's a likeness of the divine love, involves ecstasy. That seems to be going a little bit too far, doesn't it? We don't want to say that every time we're in love, we're totally out of ourselves. So Thomas says, what do we mean when we're talking about suffering ecstasy? It means being placed, being put outside of oneself. Literally, ponitur, which means to be placed. And you could think of it placing yourself as well. So this can happen with respect to two different powers or capacities that we have. He talks about the apprehensive power and the appetitive power. So the power with which we grasp things, whether through sense or intellect, and then the power through which we desire or orient ourselves or also choose things, all of that. So with respect to the apprehensive power, this is the kind of ecstasy that we're used to thinking of. He says, person is placed outside of the knowledge proper to them. So the ways in which they typically think and understand, they go beyond that. And he says there's two different ways that this can happen. One takes us above, one takes us below. So he says it could be being raised to a higher knowledge. So we could be placed outside of the, what he calls the connatural, appropriate to our nature, apprehension of his sense and reason, when he's raised up so as to comprehend things that surpass sense and reason. So, having a mystical experience of sorts, like the one that Thomas apparently had towards the end of his own life, right? Which resulted in him stopping writing the Summa Theologiae, by the way. So, that could be good, but we can also have a kind of ecstasy that lowers us. He says, when a person is overcome by violent passion, emotion, that could be anger, that could be sexual desire, that could be joy of some sort, it could be sorrow of some sort. These things take us outside of ourselves, or even madness, right? So the first of these, the lover, love makes the lover dwell on the beloved, and it draws their mind from other things, taking them outside of themselves. Maybe love elevates you, it brings you higher. Maybe it lowers you, like you're obsessed with the person. You turn into a stalker type, for example, which reason it'd say, hey, don't do that. That's not a good way to love. So that's the apprehensive power. He has a little bit more to say about the appetitive power. He says a person suffers ecstasy when that power is borne, carried, fertur, towards something else, so that it goes forth outside of itself, as it were. You could say it insofar as it's directed affectively at something outside of itself. So he says this second ecstasy is caused by love directly, and it can take place in the love of concupiscence or in the love of friendship. Now, in the love of friendship, it's happening, as he says, simply. So this is in some respects more direct. In the love of concupiscence, it seems to be ecstatic, but in some ways it's actually not. It can be called ecstatic, but only by a certain kind of qualification. So when we have love of concupiscence, the lover is carried outside of themselves. They're directed to something else, what it is that they love. They want to enjoy some good outside of themselves. They're not satisfied with what they've got. They want something that they don't have. They have desire, concupiscence, right? They want this good for themselves, and they don't go out of themselves simply, and it's still kind of self-centered. As Thomas will say, the movement remains finally in them. So it's not truly ecstatic in that sense, right? With friendship, it's very different, though. Real friendship involves, and he uses 4 different terms here, it involves wishing and doing good to the friend. So not just having a feeling or a disposition, but actually doing good things for the friend. And then how do you do that? By caring for them and providing for them for their sake, not just for your sake, not because you want to get something out of it, but because you view them as valuable in themselves, right? So that is ecstatic, the love of friendship, in a way that the love of concupiscence isn't really ecstatic. Now, coming to the objections, Thomas has some pretty straightforward and easy answers for them. So if we're talking about this, ecstasy involves or implies the loss of reason, well, yeah, sure, that happens. That is in the apprehensive power, right? Ecstasy does involve the not necessarily loss of reason, but at least derailing it for a bit, whether it's because of something higher or something lower. Similar response with the second objection, that the lover draws the beloved to themselves. He says, well, that's true of the love of concupiscence. Yeah, that is the case. But that's not the case with the love of friendship. Now, is it? And then we come to discussing the love of friendship. In the love of friendship, do you love the friend more than you love yourself? In a way, yes, but in a way, no, because you identify with the friend. The friend is another part of you. You will good to them because you view yourself as part of a greater whole that is comprised within that friendship. So he says, he who loves goes out from himself insofar as he wills the good of his friend and works for it. But he doesn't will the good of his friend more than his own good, so it doesn't follow he loves another more than himself. Now you might say, well, that makes friendship sound kind of selfish, doesn't it? That would be the wrong interpretation of that. If it is selfish, then it really is just love of concupiscence masquerading as love of friendship. When you really love your friend, you do view them as connected with you, and that doesn't lessen the love that you have for them, and it quits being about being equal or less or more or anything like that. You just will the good and do the good for them. And so in a way, that's ecstatic. You're going outside of yourself to somebody else, but you're not thereby loving them more than you love yourself. They are an important part of your existence or life. Even if you can't be with them, the fact that they are doing well or getting better matters to you. So very interesting set of reflections there, I think, that we can draw from this. And so ecstasy is indeed an effect of love, but not always in exactly the same way.